It was a hot afternoon, and the city street was full of cars' noise and people walking fast with tired faces and busy minds. Rafik stood under a small tree on the corner of the road, wiping his hands with an old cloth that used to be white but was now brown from oil and dust. He was a mechanic, but not the kind you see in big garages with shiny tools and uniforms. He worked on the street with tools he found or fixed himself, and most people ignored him. They walked past like he was part of the sidewalk, just another poor man trying to survive. Rafik was thin, with strong hands and quiet eyes. He spoke only when needed and smiled even when people were rude. He had fixed old scooters, delivery bikes, and broken vans, all without a fancy shop or help from anyone. People who knew him said he could hear what an engine was feeling. But still they only came to him when they had no money to go anywhere else. That day something different happened. A red Ferrari stopped right in front of him, its engine coughing and struggling like it had swallowed something bad. The car looked out of place among the dusty roads and honking taxis. Its paint was bright and shiny, like it had never touched anything dirty before. It caught the attention of everyone on the street. Out stepped a tall man wearing sunglasses and a suit that looked like it cost more than all the bikes on the street combined. He looked around annoyed and tapped his watch like time owed him something. This man was Mr. Aryan Kapoor, a young CEO of a big tech company, known for his money, his pride, and his sharp tongue. He looked at the Ferrari like it had betrayed him, and then looked around for help like someone waiting for a private jet in a village bus stop. His eyes landed on Rafik. "You there," he said, walking over in long, fast steps. "Can you fix a Ferrari?" Rafik nodded slowly, looking at the car, then at the man. "I can try, sir," he said in a soft voice. "Try?" The CEO laughed. "Try with what? Sticks and glue." The people around them started to gather phones in hand, ready to record something funny, or maybe something foolish. Rafik walked toward the car and opened the hood carefully. The CEO stood behind him, shaking his head and speaking loudly so the small crowd could hear. "Look at this joke," he said. "A street mechanic wants to fix a Ferrari. Maybe next he'll fly it to the moon." The crowd laughed, and someone even clapped. But Rafik said nothing. He kept looking at the engine, his fingers moving like they were reading a book only he could understand. He asked the CEO a few short questions about what happened before the engine stopped. The CEO answered with more sarcasm and a roll of his eyes. Rafik listened, then nodded again and reached for his bag. It was an old cloth bag full of tools that had seen better days. Screwdrivers with missing handles, pliers wrapped in tape, a broken pen, a rubber band, and a piece of wire that looked like it came from an old fan. The CEO laughed again, louder this time. "This is comedy gold," he said, pointing at the bag. "Ladies and gentlemen, he's going to fix a Ferrari with trash." The crowd kept laughing, but now some of them were also watching Rafik more closely. There was something about the way he worked. Calm, focused, not bothered by the noise around him. He cleaned a small part near the fuel line, checked a loose connection, adjusted a valve with a careful twist, and tied the wire in a way that didn't look pretty but made sense to him. After about 15 minutes, he stepped back and wiped his hands again. "Try it now," he said quietly. The CEO raised his eyebrows and looked at the car, then at Rafik. "You're serious?" he said. Rafik simply nodded. The CEO got in and turned the key. The engine started at once, smooth and steady like nothing had ever gone wrong. The crowd went silent. Then someone whispered, "Did he just fix that?" Another said, "That sound is perfect." Even the CEO looked surprised. He tapped the gas gently. The engine responded perfectly. He stepped out slowly, eyes on Rafik, but this time with less pride and more confusion. "What did you do?" he asked. Rafik shrugged and said, "Just gave it what it needed." The CEO didn't say anything for a moment. He looked around at the crowd, now staring not at him, but at Rafik, the street mechanic who did what a luxury service center could not. And as he stood there next to his perfectly running Ferrari, he realized for the first time that maybe he had just witnessed something rare. But he didn't know yet that this small street fix would change both their lives forever. People were still silent as the Ferrari engine purred like a happy cat in the sun. The street noise around them faded for a moment, as if the city itself had stopped to listen. Rafik stood there, quiet hands, folded tools back in his bag, like this was nothing special. But to the people watching, it felt like something impossible had just happened right in front of them. Mr. Kapoor, the CEO, looked around and saw the confused faces, the shocked smiles, and the blinking eyes of people who had just witnessed something they could not explain. He stepped closer to the open hood and stared at the engine like it had betrayed him twice, once by braking, and now by working again, without his permission. He turned to Rafik, his voice lower now, and said, "What did you do? How did you fix it?" Rafik answered softly, "I changed the air intake path that was blocked from inside. I saw it, and used a wire to clear the flow. I also adjusted the injector, timing it was off by a bit." The CEO blinked, trying to understand the words, but they floated past him like smoke. He looked down at the dirty tools, and then back at the clean sound of the engine. "This doesn't make sense," he said, more to himself than to Rafik. The crowd began to talk again, phones still recording, and voices rising with excitement. "Did you see that?" someone said. "He fixed a Ferrari with junk." Another voice laughed. "He made the CEO look like a fool." The CEO heard them, and his face turned red, not from heat, but from something else, something that felt like shame, but he didn't want to name it. He pulled out his phone and started typing, maybe texting someone, maybe pretending to do something important, anything to escape the eyes around him. Rafik, meanwhile, had already turned away, walking back to his small stool under the tree. He sat down, took a sip from his water bottle, and looked up at the sky like the job was done, and now the day could continue. But the story wasn't done, not yet, not even close. That same evening, the video went viral. It was short, only 2 minutes long, but it had everything people loved to see. A rich man being rude, a poor man staying calm, and a moment where everything flipped and the quiet man became the hero. It was shared on TikTok, then on Instagram, then YouTube and Facebook and WhatsApp. In just a few hours, it had over 500,000 views. By midnight, it was on news websites with headlines like "Street Mechanic Shocks CEO with Genius Fix" and "Man with No Degree Outsmarts Luxury Car Owner." Rafik had no idea any of this was happening. He had no smartphone, only a small keypad phone for basic calls. He didn't follow trends or care about fame. He went home that night to a small room with a fan that worked sometimes and a stove that barely stayed lit. He made tea with milk and sugar and ate bread with boiled potatoes. He smiled because the day had gone well. He had earned a little money and helped someone, even if that someone had laughed at him. But somewhere far away across the city, someone else was watching that same video over and over again. He was not laughing. He was an engineer working for Ferrari India, and he saw something in Rafik's movements, something in the way he held the tools and how his fingers danced across the engine parts. It reminded him of the old masters, people who understood machines with their hands, not just books. He paused the video and zoomed in. That wire trick was clever. That injector adjustment was precise. "Who is this man?" he whispered to himself. The next morning, the sun rose again over the city. Rafik opened his little tool bag, cleaned each piece like it was gold, and walked back to his spot under the tree. He had no idea the video had crossed 1 million views. He had no idea his name was being searched online by journalists, engineers, and even car companies. He had no idea that by the end of the day, someone from Ferrari would step out of a black car in front of him. But something in the air felt different. People walking by looked at him longer than usual. A young boy smiled and said, "Uncle, you're famous." Rafik smiled back and said, "No, I just fix engines." But deep inside, a small voice told him something was coming, something bigger than he could imagine. And just as he reached for a spanner to tighten the bolt on a scooter, a shiny black car rolled up quietly and stopped beside him. The door opened, and a man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a tablet and looking directly at him. "Are you Rafik?" the man asked. Rafik stood up, wiped his hands, and nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I am." "Good," the man said. "Because Ferrari wants to talk to you." Rafik stood frozen for a moment, not because he was afraid, but because the words felt too big to fit inside his quiet world. "Ferrari wants to talk to you," the man had said, like it was a normal thing, like it was just another customer asking for a quick fix. But this was not normal, not even close. People were now staring again, but this time they were not laughing or mocking. They were curious and amazed. The CEO who had mocked him the day before was not there to see it, but others who had seen the viral video were watching from across the street, whispering and pointing and pulling out their phones once more. The man in the suit introduced himself as Mr. Sun from Ferrari, India. He said he was sent by the engineering team after the video of Rafik fixing the red Ferrari went viral online. He explained that their office had been struggling with a rare engine issue for over 6 months. Their top technicians in Mumbai and even some overseas had failed to fully solve it. But in the short clip online, Rafik had not only spotted the exact issue, but fixed it in minutes. Without any lab tools or expensive computers. Just his eyes, his ears, and his hands. "We want to invite you to our testing center," Mr. Sun said. "Just to talk, just to understand how you knew what the problem was." Rafik looked at him, still unsure, still quiet. "I don't have a degree," he said slowly. "I never studied engineering. I just fix things." Mr. Sun smiled and replied, "That is exactly why we want to meet you." He handed Rafik a printed invitation and a card with a name and a number. Then he got back into the black car and left just as quietly as he came. The entire street was silent for a moment, then someone clapped. Then others followed. Soon the whole street was clapping for the man. They had once ignored the man who fixed bikes and scooters under a tree with broken tools and a calm face. Rafik looked down at the invitation in his hands. It was real. His fingers were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of something new, something he had never felt before. Possibility. That night Rafik walked home slowly thinking about everything. He passed the shops, the buses, the children running with kites, and the old Chai man who gave him a free cup of tea and said, "You made us proud." He reached his small room and sat on the floor staring at the invitation until the fan stopped spinning and the lights flickered off due to another power cut. But his thoughts kept spinning faster than ever. The next morning was different. Rafik wore a clean shirt borrowed from a neighbor and traveled across the city by train, then bus, then taxi, holding the invitation close to his chest. When he reached the Ferrari office, he was surprised by how big everything looked. Glass buildings, men in suits, women in heels, shiny floors, machines that looked like spaceships. But when he entered the testing garage, something inside him felt calm. He was among engines again. He was home. The engineers greeted him politely and showed him the same engine model from the Ferrari he had fixed. They asked him to repeat what he had done. Rafik walked over slowly and explained every step, every sound he heard, every vibration. He felt every reason behind his action. The room grew quiet as he spoke. One of the senior engineers nodded and said, "This is exactly what we missed." Another said his method was not from a textbook, but it worked perfectly. They ran tests. The data matched. Rafik was right. After the session, they asked him to join a lunch meeting. There they offered him something he never imagined. A chance to work with them as a freelance consultant to solve complex mechanical problems. No degree required. Just his gift. Back on the street, the CEO finally saw the viral video. He watched himself laugh and mock Rafik in front of the crowd. He watched the part where Rafik calmly fixed the Ferrari. He saw the comments. Thousands of people calling Rafik a genius and him a bully. He tried to explain to his team that it was just a joke, just a moment. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had misjudged someone who saw the world not through money or pride, but through purpose. That same evening, Rafik returned to his street corner. People gathered again, not to mock, but to ask questions, take pictures, and shake his hand. But Rafik only smiled and got back to work fixing a broken scooter with the same care and patience as always. Because, for him, every engine was special, and every sound told a story. Even now, as people called him famous, even as the city whispered his name, he stayed grounded. Because Rafik knew something the CEO had only just learned. Respect is not something you wear. It is something you earn. The sun rose slowly over the city, but for Rafik, the day had already begun. He woke up before the birds, his hands still marked with grease from the day before, but his heart lighter than ever. He washed his face, put on his same worn shirt, and walked out with a smile that came not from money or praise, but from something deeper. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world was finally starting to see him for who he really was. At the street corner, people were already waiting. Some had broken bikes, others had questions, and a few just wanted to shake his hand. "Uncle, you're on YouTube," one boy shouted, holding up a phone with the video paused on Rafiq's face. Rafiq smiled and nodded, but got back to work quietly, just like always. Later that morning, a white car pulled up. It was not a Ferrari this time, but a simple, elegant car with tinted windows. A man and a woman stepped out, both dressed in clean business clothes, holding folders and a small gift box. They approached Rafiq with warm smiles and respectful voices. "We are from Ferrari headquarters in Italy," the man said. "We came to speak with you personally. May we sit with you for a moment?" Rafiq offered them his wooden stool and stood with hands folded. The woman handed him the box. Inside was a small golden key, not to a car, but to a door. It was a symbol of invitation. "We are building a new research center in Milan," she explained. "We want people who think differently. People who understand machines not just through numbers, but through instinct. And your video showed us something we almost forgot. Real genius lives in places we don't often look." Rafiq listened quietly. He had never heard anyone speak like that to him. Not his teachers, not customers, not even neighbors. They showed him papers with plans for training, travel, and partnership. No contract, yet just an open door and a flight ticket with his name already printed. "You don't need to decide now," the man said. "But if you do join us, we will take care of everything. We just want you to keep doing what you do best, listening to machines and solving problems no one else can see." For the first time, Rafiq looked unsure. He had always dreamed of building something bigger than just a street corner. But his life was here, his tools, his people, his memories. He looked around and saw the kids playing with tires, the tea seller who waved from across the road, the taxi driver who once let him ride for free. How could he leave this behind? That evening he visited the local mosque, sat alone on the cold floor, and thought deeply. He remembered his father, who used to fix radios and fans with the same passion. He remembered the first time he opened a scooter engine and felt the gears move in his hands. He remembered every time someone said, "You're just a street boy, no one important." But now he was being asked to teach Ferrari how to fix problems they could not solve with all their machines. The next morning he packed a small bag, not with clothes or money, but with his oldest tools, the ones that still worked better than anything new. He walked to the address the Ferrari team had given him and handed the man his answer. "Yes, I will come," he said. "Not because I want to be famous, but because I want to learn more and teach more. If even one child sees my story and believes in their own hands, then it will be worth it." Before leaving the city, he visited the CEO one last time. Mr. Kapoor looked surprised to see him. He had been hiding from the spotlight ever since the video went viral. He had lost some respect, some clients, and a lot of pride. Rafiq sat across from him and said simply, "Thank you for laughing that day. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have tried so hard. And because of that, I found my path." The CEO nodded slowly, not angry, not proud, just humbled. At the airport, Rafiq held his bag close and looked at the plane with wide eyes. He had never been this far from home. He had never been on a plane. He had never seen snow or tasted pasta or spoken in a room full of engineers from 10 different countries. But he was ready. As the plane took off and the city became a soft blur beneath the clouds, Rafiq closed his eyes and whispered a small prayer. Not for success, but for strength. To stay the same person no matter how high he flew. Because he knew something very few people ever learn. Real engines may be built in factories, but real heart is built in the streets. The wind in Milan was colder than anything Rafiq had ever felt. He stood outside the Ferrari Research Center wearing a borrowed jacket, still holding the same old bag of tools he had brought from home. Around him were tall buildings, glass windows, and people walking fast with coffee in their hands and headphones in their ears. It was a new world, a place where people spoke 3 languages in one sentence, and where machines looked more like artwork than engines. But Rafik stayed calm, because inside those machines he heard the same sounds. The same clicks, the same knocks, the same quiet calls for help. Just like back on his street corner under the tree, where he first learned to listen not with his ears, but with his heart. Inside the center, he met teams of young engineers, men and women with degrees from big universities and titles longer than their names. At first, some of them were unsure. They had seen the viral video, but still wondered what a street mechanic could teach them. But when Rafik opened an engine and began to explain with simple words and careful hands, they started to listen. He showed them how to feel the pulse of a machine by touch, how to hear a spark's delay just by sound, how to sense a small imbalance just by watching the way oil moved across a gear. They watched closely, asked questions, and took notes. And for the first time in a long while, they began to see machines not just as parts, but as living systems. Meanwhile, back in India, the video kept spreading. It was translated into different languages, turned into short reels, turned into quotes on posters. News channels covered the story. Blogs called him the street engineer. Children in villages spoke his name with pride. He was no longer just Rafik from the street corner. He had become something larger, a symbol of hidden talent, of quiet genius, of hope. But not everyone was happy. Mr. Aryan Kapoor, the CEO, who had once laughed at Rafik, was now facing questions from everywhere. People were asking why he had mocked someone so talented, why he never apologized, why he stayed silent as the world praised the very man he once humiliated. His public image took a hit. His company saw a drop in support. Investors pulled back quietly. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of the story. He tried to fix things. He posted online, saying he always believed in grassroots talent. He wrote that he supported Rafik from the beginning. But the internet remembered everything. They remembered the laughter, the words, the look on his face when he said, "Maybe next you'll fly it to the moon." And now Rafik was flying higher than anyone expected. One night in Milan, Rafik received an email from a school in India. The children had made a painting of him fixing a Ferrari with golden hands. He stared at it for a long time, his eyes soft as hands resting on the keyboard, not knowing what to type back. He walked to the small balcony of his apartment, looked up at the sky, and smiled. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about engines. It was about being seen. He began to share small lessons online, not in fancy language, just simple videos explaining basic things. How to clean a carburetor, how to listen for brake issues, how to check for leaks. His videos reached more people than anyone expected. They called him the People's Engineer. One day, while walking through the Ferrari Center, he was stopped by a man from the design team. "We saw your fix being tested in Germany," he said. "It's helping with a new prototype." Rafik nodded and thanked him. But inside, he felt something more. Not pride. Not victory, just peace. A few days later, he received a letter from Ferrari leadership. They wanted to invite him to speak at an international auto conference. They wanted him to share his journey, not just the technical part, but the human part. How someone without a degree, without support, without anything except skill and humility could rise and inspire a generation. Rafik sat down that night and wrote his speech by hand. He didn't use big words. He didn't try to sound smart. He just told the truth. About the laughter. About the street. About the first time he felt an engine beat like a heartbeat. And about the day he learned that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest gift of all. Because when people don't expect anything from you, they never see you coming. The lights were bright and the hall was quiet as hundreds of people waited in their seats. Big names from the car industry filled the room. Engineers, designers, CEOs, students, media people, all waiting to hear from a man they once knew only as the mechanic from the street. A man with no degree, no training, no formal background. Just hands that worked like instruments and eyes that saw what machines were trying to say. Rafiq walked slowly to the stage wearing a simple black shirt and a name badge that read guest speaker. He looked out at the crowd, took a breath, and smiled gently. Not because he was proud, but because he had come so far from that little corner under the tree. The journey was long, but the heart that guided him never changed. He spoke softly, with simple words telling the story of how he learned from broken radios and old scooters. He spoke of the day the Ferrari stopped in front of him. He spoke of the laughter, the phones recording the crowd watching. And he spoke of how he stayed quiet and focused because the engine was the only voice that mattered in that moment. The room listened with full attention. Some smiled, some nodded, and a few wiped their eyes. Because what Rafiq said was not just about cars. It was about respect, about dignity, about believing in yourself even when no one else does. When the speech ended, the applause was long and loud. He didn't bow. He didn't wave. He just smiled and walked off the stage the same way he had walked into every job in his life, with steady feet and quiet grace. After the event, people gathered around him. Some wanted selfies. Some asked technical questions. But many just wanted to say thank you. One young girl said, "I want to be like you." He looked at her and said, "No. Be better. Learn more. And always remember where you started." Meanwhile, back in India, the CEO, Mr. Aryan Kapoor, sat alone in his office, watching the speech on his laptop. The same man he once mocked was now speaking to the world. His own name had faded from the headlines. His pride had taken many hits since that day. But something inside him had changed too. Later that week, he asked to meet Rafiq. Not in an office, not in a conference room, but on the same street where it all began. Rafiq agreed and came early, as usual, sitting on a small stool under the tree where it had all started. The CEO arrived quietly, wearing plain clothes, no sunglasses, no gold watch, just a man ready to face the truth. He stood before Rafiq with a slow breath and said, "I was wrong. I judged you by your clothes, your tools, your place. I thought I was better because of what I had. But you showed me what true skill looks like. You taught me something no business school ever could." Rafiq looked at him and simply said, "I forgive you. Because if you hadn't laughed, I might never have tried. And if I never tried, I might still be unseen." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the city move around them. Then the CEO stood and left. No handshake, no photos, just respect. A few months later, Rafiq opened a training center in India. Not in a fancy building, but right beside the old street corner where his story began. It was called Rafiq Auto Lab. Young boys and girls came there to learn not just how to fix engines, but how to listen, how to think, how to stay calm under pressure. He kept the original stool under the tree. He never threw it away. It reminded him that greatness does not begin in comfort. It begins in struggle and silence, in hard work that nobody claps for. One day, a new Ferrari passed by the center. It slowed down. The driver leaned out and asked, "Are you Rafiq?" The kids outside answered before he could. "Yes, he is. He's the man who hears engines like music. He's the man who turned shame into strength. He's the man who showed the world that even street corners can create legends." Rafiq just smiled and returned to teaching. Because for him, the story was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to the young mechanic in himself that he was always right to believe. And as the sun set behind the buildings and the city lights turned on one by one, Rafiq stood in his garage full of laughter, tools, ideas, and dreams. Not a millionaire, not a celebrity, but something far greater. A teacher, a master, a man who never let mockery define him, but let purpose refine him. And this was not the end of the story, only the beginning of a new engine, a new generation, and a legacy that would never stop running.